Greetings and welcome to IT SPARC Cast Deep Dive. I'm your host, John Barger.
And I'm your host, Lou Schmidt.
IT SPARC Cast Deep Dive is a venture into topics that we feel are important with insights, opinions, and a little sarcasm from two experts, each with over 20 years of experience working in IT or for IT vendors.
We have been around, but right now what we really want to do is dig deeper.
So this is a series that we've been doing on remote work, and this is a topic that we care very much about. And this is episode 9 of this series, and this is our special listener Q&A episode. So if you haven't watched the first 8 episodes on this topic, we will put a link in the show notes. And if you're on YouTube, you'll see a link appear right above Lou's head right now. We highly recommend you go through at least several of those so you have an idea of what we're talking about. What we're going to do today is we're going to dig into the mailbag, and we're going to take questions and feedback from listeners like you and give you our thoughts and opinions on that. Lou, do you want to walk us through what we've done over the last 8 episodes and the topics that we've talked about?
Absolutely. So one of the things, the way we started this discussion is sort of a passionate defense of why remote work is so, as we call it, telework, remote work, whatever, is so effective in increasing the value of your team and increasing the value for your company. Then we've sort of dug into some of the best practices on how to manage and work with a remote team, which is really common in the IT space. We talked about some of the mechanics of what to do to present yourself well if you happen to be working remotely. And now we've had some really great discussions on the finer point of management and time, and why you need to be very prescriptive about how you set time and management examples. But we've got a lot of information out there, and we've got some questions. And I think it's time that we paused a little, picked up some of your stuff.
Absolutely. So we are going to dig into the mailbag and go through some of that feedback. If you have questions or feedback, please send email to feedback@itsparkcast.com. That's feedback at itsparkcast.com, or hit us up on X at IT SPARCcast. So with that, let's go ahead and dig into the mailbag.
So our first question came from Zoey via email, and she wrote, Elon Musk is arguably the most successful entrepreneur in recent history. Fair. Okay. He has a strong return to office stance across all of his companies. And as we've seen, he's been a driving force behind that in the federal space as well. How do you reconcile this with your anti-RTO stance?
So that's a great question, Zoey, and I really appreciate you sending that in. I think that it's important to realize that however you feel about him politically or otherwise, Elon is a brilliant individual, and he really has done well with the companies that he runs. That being said, I think that you can realize that nobody is perfect, and there are times when he might be making mistakes, or there might be times where the reasoning behind it is different than what is stated. And I think it was a good example of somebody who was brilliant but not perfect. I think you could look at Steve Jobs. You could look at all kinds of examples in the past where they were visionaries and they did amazing things and created some of the biggest companies in the world, but were flawed. Now, that being said, let's divide this up into a couple of different areas, and the different areas where that RTO mandate under Musk has come in. And the first one I want to talk about is SpaceX and Tesla. So one of the things that we've always stated along the way is that there are certain jobs that do require you to be on site. So we won't necessarily say in the office, because some of those are assembly lines, or some of those are launch pads and things like that. Obviously, to use Lou's favorite term, if you have to bang a rocket with a hammer, you kind of have to be next to the rocket. So I think that that's an important and fair point. And we have never argued that 100% of the planet can work from home. That's not the case. We're saying information workers, where their job is to sit in front of a computer, to type in data, read emails, join meetings, and things like that. If that's the majority of their job, that can be done remote. And again, we're not stating that that has to be remote 100% of the time. There are great reasons to get groups together to meet and things like that.
If I may bring up a point here.
Sure.
Personally, I've been in both types of jobs. I started my career in what would be called technician role, both in the military and on a research systems. You had to have proximity to the devices, right? I worked on a 2 mile long particle accelerator. You're not going to fix that thing remotely, because if it could have been done, main control would have already inputted into the main. If it's spitting sparks and smoke, yeah, I got to get in there and dig stuff out. But if you think about, let's say, the rocket science aspect of it, which I have some background in, the best thing you can do is go off somewhere and think and think and think and math and math and math, and then take your idea, take it out to an experimental area, factory floor, whatever you have to do, implement it, and then test it. Where have we seen this? We've seen this in Starship. We saw this in Falcon, right? If you look at SpaceX, their rapidly iterating system. So in that case, you could have a hybrid work model. Now, I would love to give you an opposite example of that as well.
Go ahead.
There is a major aerospace company based out of Seattle at one point that made sure that their managers and engineers' offices had windows not to the outside of the building, the inside of the hangar where the aircraft were being assembled. When they stopped doing that, they started having quality issues. We've all heard it.
Does this company have a name that rhymes with crowing?
Perhaps. But there's an interesting correlation there. So we're not going to tell you, oh, you should take everybody and make them remote.
Right.
I think over time, developments are happening that are going to allow more remote interaction with the type. Physical avatars that can go out there and remotely interact. Things like what Tesla is doing with Optimus. I think a lot of people are missing the point. It doesn't have to be all AI. I could literally put myself into that robot, walk out, knock on a rocket. I think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But we're in this interesting in-between period. And I get why you want people in the office, but I think it's bigger than this, John.
Well, let me address one other thing real quick. Before you get into that. The other thing is that Musk made a claim that it wasn't fair for the factory workers to be required to be on site while the information workers get to work from home. And for those of you on the audio podcast, I used air quotes on the get to work from home. And I think there's a problem on this based on that argument there. So first of all, it shows that there is value for those information workers to get to work from home. So that means that there's an advantage and a benefit to working from home, or that at least it's desirable. All right. So that, I think, it kind of turns that argument around. And I think that's where the flaw in Musk's argument comes into play. It's also a bit one-sided, because if you think about it, it's very likely that those factory workers are paid hourly. So they put in their 8 hours and then they go home. Very rarely do information workers, salaried information workers, work a standard 8-hour day, right? They either they can split that time up, or in many cases, I mean, when was the last time you worked a 40-hour work week on a regular basis, right? I work a 40-hour work week when I take a day off. Then it might be a 40-hour work week, right? So where's the quid pro quo for those information workers? If I'm forced to come into the office, but I'm there until 6 or 7 o'clock at night. Well, you know what? It's going to be dark and there's going to be less people in the office then, and I'm there alone. So I think that there's something to be said, that there's some flaws to that argument. But I know you had some more points to make, Lou. So.
Well, actually, I'd like to riff on that a little bit, because you brought up a really great point. Back when I used to work on the particle accelerator, when I was in the military, 24/7, right? If you were on a pager or somebody could find you, you were going to do something, right? There was no expectation of your time. It's the military's time. Yeah. You're just a tool. When I was working on the accelerator, I was hourly, and we had 3 shifts. So we covered 24/7, 365 on this thing, this big physics experiment. Mm-hmm. The best thing about that job is when you left after 8 hours, you were done. Yep. It wasn't your problem anymore. Yep. You wrote your last log entry. They inputted it into the system. You cleared your last computerized trouble report, called a cater, and you left. Right. I mean, have you had anybody on this podcast had a job like that recently? Because I guarantee you didn't. Right. But then think about that And now think about getting back to Musk.
Yep.
What I've seen, what I've observed, and I think John agrees with me to some point, is that Tesla and SpaceX, companies that Musk's run, aren't really one company.
Yep.
They're a bunch of startups stuffed under a sign.
Yeah.
So if you think Tesla started out by throwing batteries, by taking laptop batteries, who everybody said would never work, how'd that work out? Shoving it into sort of a pre-built car. So they've done miracles in manufacturing, battery technology, information technology, AI technology, camera technology. They have their own glass department. So if you think about the operating model that Musk operates on, you've got a genius that drops in and with his little bubbles of smart, and dude's smart, okay?
Yeah.
Starts companies. So the Tesla that exists now and the SpaceX that exists now isn't the same company that existed 5 years ago. So in a way, it's a lot like a startup culture. Now that comes with its own problems. And John, I think you wanted to say something about that.
And because I've been part of the world of startups, and I've been a co-founder of well, now if you include this, 4 different startups. But and it's something that I know really, really well. Most companies cannot run as a startup. So let's take Amazon, because we talk about Andy Jassy and Amazon on a regular basis. Amazon employs 1.5 million people. There is in no way, shape, or form you can ever consider that any kind of startup culture. The only reason that a company like, you could definitely understand SpaceX being startup culture. It's small enough and focused enough that you can do that. Tesla might start to get a little bit more difficult to understand it unless you look at it the way Lewis mentioned it, is that it's actually multiple companies under one sign, and that they're a robotics company and a car manufacturing company and an AI company for the self-driving. And that's really what they're doing.
Company.
And an energy company.
Yeah.
And so when you look at it from that standpoint, and you look at it from the reason you go to that company or those 2 companies is because you want to be part of that culture, right? You don't say, I need a job, so I might as well check out Tesla or SpaceX.
Do not do that.
You might say that for Amazon, but you're not going to say that for Tesla or SpaceX. So you know what you're getting into, right? Being at a startup is hard. It is really hard, especially if you're in the mode of growth and that startup mode. And it's definitely not a 9-to-5 job unless you're one of those hourly workers on the factory floor.
It will eat your life.
It will. And I've done that. I stopped. I moved to corporate back when my son was less than a year old, because I just wasn't seeing him. I wasn't spending time with him. And so I had to make a change for my family's benefit, for my own sanity. And that's when I went to corporate out of a startup. And I would not join a startup while my kids were young. So I just wouldn't do it. That being said, I get what he's doing there. And he's driving a startup culture. He lived in the factory floor, at times. He would be there at night. And he did that for 2 reasons. One is that so he could wake up and get things done, because he never sleeps, evidently. But also because he wanted people to see him there. And that's why he did that. And I think that that's admirable. But you can't expect 50,000 mid-level managers at a very large company with 1 million employees to be sleeping in the office. That's not going to work. Now, let me throw another side to this with Musk. Okay. He runs at least 5 different companies and also runs the Department of Government Efficiency. I guarantee you he's not on site at all of those locations all the time.
Quantum superpositioning doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way. So he is, on large, a remote worker. So there again, on its face, there's a problem with his logic. So I just want to throw that out there. Again, a lot of respect for the companies that he's built. I'm going to throw this back to the Steve Jobs thing. There was many, many years ago when I was on Facebook, I had a friend post a quote from Steve Jobs about not allowing his kids to have devices with screens and things like that. And actually I agreed with the point, but I also made a point is like, Steve Jobs was not the person you wanted to take parenting advice from, right? So I'm not sure that how you run a large corporate entity, I don't know if you want to get Musk's advice on how to run it. That's just my take on that.
You know, to be honest, it's like, would I have worked for Mr. Jobs? Probably not. He was a tough guy to work for.
Yeah.
Elon's a tough guy to work for, from what I've seen. But the potential benefit of what you get out of that experience, that's why you go. And, you know, now that sort of transits us to the X and the DOGE. What is going on with this whole RTO thing in government?
Yeah,
John,
so
you had something you really wanted to say about
I
that.
do. And I feel I have, I think that if you look at it and if you really understand what's going on, this is kind of obvious, but I'm going to state it anyway. So first of all, for X, the majority of the employees at X are information workers, right? That's true. You got programmers, you got marketing folks, you have people, looking at the traffic. You have all these types of people. These are all information workers. I feel very strongly that with both X and Doge, that this is actually a move as a RIF. It's a reduction in force without having to do a layoff. And so with X, back then it was Twitter, that was a hardcore move. He came in, I think he was pissed off because he had kind of tried to back out of the deal. And I'm, again, not getting into the whole politics and the inside of that, but he came in and said, I'm gonna shred this thing to efficiency and then grow it back up the way I want it. And I want staff that are dedicated, hardcore startup mentality, and that's what I want to move forward with. Return to office. If you're not willing to come into the office, you're not fully vested. Get out. And I think that that's what the move was there. With the Department of Government Efficiency, it is just that. Let's cut in, again, without getting into the politics, in the mind of the group that's doing this, cut the fat, reduce government spending, all of that. So again, it's actually been stated that the return to office is designed to force people to quit. Now, the good news for those people is they're now offering that 8-month severance package. So that's a good deal for them. And the old Twitter employees did not get that benefit. So feel bad for them, but keep in mind that those government jobs will get basically an 8-month severance and time to find another job.
There's a second dimension to this as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
How much space do we actually need for the federal government? Because
Right.
heating a space, look, we're IT people. We know there's a BIS number, right?
Yeah.
Butts and seats. There has to be heat. There has to be data. There has to be surveillance. There has to be food nearby. There has to be parking. All of this stuff costs money. It has to be safe to go to the office. We've seen a lot of complaints. X is moving out of San Francisco into Austin for just that reason. It is really not safe to go into the office. In where their office is, the prior Twitter office, they've had a lot of problems. Yeah. So it's like, and I get it. I do get it. How much space do we need? The only way to find out is find out how many people we need.
And you know what, Lou, that actually brings us right into our very next question. So BB7 asked us on X, if IT is supposed to be the champion of remote work, how should IT leaders push back against executive leadership who are stubbornly pro RTO? What's the best strategy for influencing policy when the C-suite is not receptive? So it's a great question. We've touched a little bit on that in the past. And what it comes down to, in my mind, I think this is actually, there's a lot to this. And we could probably do a whole episode just on this. But I'm going to go ahead and give you the overarching thing. It's all about the money.
Exactly. Right? The C stands for cash.
Right.
If you take this back to cash, you're going to have the superior argument all the time, because most of the time in the C-suites, you're dealing with MBAs.
Right.
And
so, at the very basic piece, profit is earnings minus expenses. That's it's that simple, right? And more profit is more good. So, yes. So how does work from home save money? So obviously rent is a big part of it, or facilities costs in general. If you own, you can sell off those. Now, one of the things that I think does drive RTO behavior are companies that own their own office space. If you look at Apple, they built the giant, spaceship in the, out there, and they want that filled. They want to use that space. They don't want real estate that they've built, and really, who else is going to move into there? They can't split it off. They can't sublet it. They want people in that space.
In the
Go ahead.
case of Apple, however, they have offices spread all over the valley.
Of course.
I grew up there. So if I was Apple and this was causing me angst, what I'd be doing is getting rid of those sub offices that are all over the flipping place, getting
Correct.
everybody into the UFO. But that introduces other problems. I know that area incredibly well. I grew up not far from it. Traffic sucks.
Yeah.
Adding more is not going to be good.
Right.
That's not something we have on our list, but it really does matter.
It does. It does. And we've talked about that in other ways, that, the drain on the individual of having to go through that kind of commute. But there are other ways that you're going to be saving money as well. You're saving money if you have less facilities or dark facilities. You're saving money on power. Especially in the Silicon Valley area, there's lots of perks in the office. Sometimes they bring in food, so you get free lunch, and if you're working late, you get free dinners. I've been part of those companies where that's happened. I know it still goes on with a lot of these. You're going to be saving money there. You're going to be saving money on salaries. So let's dig into that for a moment. So if I got the same number of employees, how am I saving money on salaries? Well, you're saving money because if I have to live in Silicon Valley, or even worse, in San Francisco proper, the amount of money you have to pay me just to avoid having to live in a tiny, tiny, dirty apartment with 7 roommates is astronomical. And you're going to find that if I hire somebody in Alabama or in New Hampshire or in Arizona, someplace like that, I'm going to be paying a lot less than somebody in Silicon Valley, because their cost of living is dramatically less. And each of those 3 areas is going to have different costs of living. But, if you look at that person in Alabama, they might be paid 1/3 of what the person in San Francisco would be paid. All right. So again, significant savings. And again, because we can work remote, when we've talked about this, and it's proven to work when you have proper management. And so if you put together an analysis on this, and again, I'm not expecting IT to actually do that full analysis, but find a champion in the company, somebody that cares about this like you do, that has these kind of pieces. Maybe form a stealth group and actually do an investigation on this. Get people from HR, get people from finance involved. Finance will want to work on this with you.
So think about this. We all went through outsourcing.
Right.
That it was cheaper to get people from India or China or Eastern Europe. Still a big thing, but we had a lot of problems with it because of cultural issues and time shift issues. So now the big thing is insourcing, right? You are merely applying insourcing, which is not new, to a higher level of thinking. And you will save money and you will get better results, because people talk about diversity leading to better products. Diversity isn't about what you look like. It's about what you think like.
Yeah.
And by getting people from a lot of different areas, you're going to do a much better job of avoiding groupthink. And you can get some really good results by doing that if you know what you're doing.
100%.
But you can't get it if you're in a groupthink situation.
You can't. And so there are other ways you can save money as well. And so we actually like to hear from you out there if you have any thoughts on that. You have any other closing thoughts before we wrap this up, Lou?
The problem that you tend to run into, that we are going to dive deeper on in a future episode, is culture. And can
100%.
your company culture, if your company culture hasn't evolved to the point where you can't virtualize location, you got a problem.
Yeah.
You really need to think about this.
Culture cannot be based on we're all in the same building at the same time. Culture's got to be much bigger than that. And we'll deal with that in a future episode, and we'll get into that. I also think that this topic on how to sell to the C-suite is something that we could do at least one episode, maybe a couple, on building the story. How do you collaborate with finance and others to help build the story and then sell it up to the C-suite? And I tell you what, one of the things that has always been part of my method, because I sold to IT on a regular basis, was always to provide visibility to that group, so that they were seen as solving problems and becoming almost the hero of the company by saving money, by adding more efficiencies and allowing the company to operate better. Then you get visibility, and then this could be your path to promotion and to other advancements, and even maybe your next job. This could help you there. So I think that's something you really want to pay attention to when we get there.
And this is the time because the core of IT, since IT has existed, has been the ground under you is always changing. It always has. From the very beginning of the days when business analysis became this information function before IT really existed, we wrote programs to do basic stuff that now we do in a spreadsheet that you can run on a phone. We have always been the pathfinders in a very rapidly changing world. And this is why we're talking to you about this stuff, because you have the potential to impact this greatly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this first episode of 2 on listener Q&A, and we're going to address more questions next week. But we do want to hear more from you, and we can't do a podcast like this without feedback and listeners like you. So if you have a topic you want us to cover, or if you have additional questions or even pushback, please, we want to hear your pushback on our what we're saying here. If you believe differently, let us know. Send email to feedback@itsparkcast.com. That's feedback at itsparkcast.com, or hit us up on X at @itsparkcast. Or you can also leave us comments on YouTube. And we're finding a lot of people starting to do that, and we're really appreciative of that. And we think that's great. Let us know again, do you agree with that there is a cost savings to remote work? Do you think that any potential inefficiencies counteract that cost savings? Do you agree with what we said about Elon Musk? Do you have a different opinion there? Is there something else you want us to talk about? We want to hear from you. Be sure to hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications. That's really going to help us grow. If you're continuing to listen to us and you're getting value out of this, tell your friends, tell your colleagues, reach out to us publicly on X and other places to get that engagement going. That's going to help us grow, and it's going to help others learn from what we're talking about as well. We'll talk to you again later on our next episode. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much.